All right, so, well, first, welcome and thank you to everyone for attending the session. This is part of Nuclear Science Week, and this session is co-hosted with EPRI, or the Electric Power Research Institute, and the DC chapter of Women in Nuclear. So I will be, I'm your host from EPRI, and Ashley McKendry is your host from DC WIN. In the fun facts, or in the chat box, we have posted a few links if you're interested about EPRI, Nuclear Science Week, or Women in Nuclear. But now I want to pass it over to Bob Coward, a principal officer at NPR, to give some opening remarks on behalf of DC WIN.
Thank you, Emma. And I want to welcome everybody. I'm looking at the counter here. It's at 80 and going up. A lot of interest in this topic. That's important. Today's topic is really important, not just for us, but for society. I did, the president of the American Nuclear Society stint a couple of years ago, in addition to leading NPR. And so I've really had the chance to engage a lot of stakeholders, a lot of policymakers, a lot of industry professionals and leaders in my professional life. And what I can tell you is, we're heading towards a low carbon world. Perhaps at different paces in different places, and perhaps not as fast as some desire, but you can feel the acceleration occurring in real time right in front of us. And when it comes to power, there's a growing list of studies and evaluations that show that wind, solar, and storage just aren't enough by themselves. Baseload power in the future may be different than in the past, but the studies show there is the need for some sort of foundation source on the grid. A foundation that's reliable, resilient, produces power 24/7, independent of weather and the time of the day. And most of those studies say the right option's nuclear power. So I want to encourage everyone to not see nuclear in the low carbon world as an opportunity for our industry and for us as professionals. Rather, I would encourage all of us to see this work as an obligation, to each other and to society. To work together to develop the right role for nuclear in concert with other sources and strategies, and then make it happen, and to continue our amazingly high levels of performance, and to really deliver what the world is asking for us, the solution. I care about this a lot, and everyone on this webinar and everyone you work with should just as well. I'm confident today's going to be really good, really valuable, really beneficial. I want to throw my thanks in advance to the panelists for their support and contributions. I also want to thank the volunteers and others who make these kind of things happen. We sometimes, they're behind the scenes and we sometimes forget about their work. I want to make sure we don't do that this time. So, thanks to everybody. Make sure to ask good questions and let's go make this happen. It's important for all of us. So again, I'll hand off back to Emma. Thank you very much.
Bob, for those inspiring words. So to try to kick this off, the goal of when we were trying to put together this session was really trying to build awareness, since it is Nuclear Science Week, of nuclear's critical role in clean energy and a low carbon economy. And as you see on this slide here, I would like to highlight, nuclear energy should be recognized for its reliability. It should be treated on equal terms to other low carbon technologies as a robust energy source and part of the low carbon mix. And we did put another fun fact in here from the World Nuclear Association if you want to learn more about kind of an article on this topic. And so I don't want to really take too much time on opening remarks, since Bob did such a great job doing this. I will like to say, you can add questions at any time in the Q&A or in the chat box. We'll be recording them. And we will have a little Q&A session at the end, so we really won't be covering that until later. But there will also be a discussion section that we're going to go forward on, and you'll get to interact at that point and try to dictate, how do we begin these discussions. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Katie, and she's in here. She's looking beautiful in pink. She's sitting in our DC office. She is our vice president of External Relations and Communications for the Electric Power Research Institute. So I'd like to introduce her. I wish we all could be in the same room together, Katie, but you know, these are fun times, and we'll get to do this on webinar instead. And she provides executive direction and leadership for EPRI's external stakeholder relations and for communications in a variety of areas. She has more than 25 years of experience in energy, water, and manufacturing industries and in the public sector. Most recently, she has come from the U.S. Department of Energy. She has experience at the Edison Electric Institute as well as the McLeod Group. So Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you for your remarks.
Okay. Thank you for that kind introduction, Emma. And thanks to Bob Coward, Ashley McKendry, and Women in Nuclear for allowing me to join this incredible panel. As I worked with my communications team to prepare these remarks, we started with what my vision would be when I decided to study chemical engineering. Quite frankly, I had none. I just knew that my first choice of being the next goose, and for those of you who didn't grow up in the 80s, I'm talking the Top Gun engineer who took a backseat to Tom Cruise, the fighter pilot, it just wasn't going to work out. And so my love of chemistry and discovery would be better suited for me as a chemical engineer. So while I thought of a variety of possibilities, I didn't envision my career would lead to be here with you today. That's the thing about expectations. They change, and changing expectations are exactly what the nuclear industry is experiencing today. Changing expectations of how to operate a nuclear plant and an energy system with more variable resources. Changing expectations for nuclear growth as momentum builds around emerging technologies, and changing expectations for the role of nuclear energy in an energy future focused on reducing carbon. Creating a cleaner energy future is central to EPRI's research. Next slide. I think we need to, can we jump the slides? I just see the first title slide. Oh, there we go. Thank you. In 2005, the US emitted 6 gigatons of energy-related CO2. By 2020, a shift to cleaner generation and improved energy efficiency dropped that number to 5 gigatons. Continuing those efforts, adding advancements in energy storage, we see a path to reduce emissions to 4 gigatons by 2030, doubling the progress since 2005 in 10 years. As we evaluate pathways to decarbonization, consider this. The US nuclear fleet is capable of generating 98 gigawatts of carbon-free electricity. Next slide. There we go. Without nuclear in the mix, every watt of nuclear generation would need to be replaced with carbon-free resources to deliver the same benefits we are receiving today. But it's not a one-to-one trade. Due to the difference in capacity factors, it would take 3 to 4 gigawatts of wind or solar to replace each gigawatt of nuclear of the grid. Nuclear is essential to reducing carbon emissions affordably and reliably. Looking further into the future, the US could reduce energy-related CO2 emissions to 1 gigaton or less by 2050. From 6 to 1, it's an incredible feat that we believe is within reach. EPRI is bringing industry stakeholders together to enable that vision through the Low Carbon Resources Initiative, which I'll discuss shortly. Next slide. Okay. For EPRI, it's not just about what can be done to enable a cleaner energy future, but how we're shaping the future of energy. It's a fascinating concept that's central to EPRI's society-focused mission. Benny described the energy system transition in terms of technology, in short, the 3 Ds, which I'll refer to as digitalization, demand, and decarbonization. Digitalization involves advanced technologies helping utilities meet energy needs more efficiently, smart consumer products enabling efficient electrification, and every connected device in between. For nuclear plants, this includes incorporating the latest digital technologies to finely tune operations. The second D, demand, addresses shifts in how, when, and where customers are using energy. From increased consumption at home during the pandemic, growing off-peak electric vehicle charging, moving charge points from home to grocery store to office, to changing expectations of what a nuclear plant delivers. It's not just about electricity anymore. Through a new initiative with the nuclear sector's innovation team, EPRI is working with global energy stakeholders to identify valuable products and sources of revenue for new and existing nuclear plants beyond electrical generation, from energy storage to life-saving isotopes. The big D, decarbonization, is the environmental objective so many around the world are trying to achieve. As we research all three Ds, decarbonization is one for which EPRI sees significant potential and beyond the global energy sector. Next slide, please. We see a global energy ecosystem where digitalization, demand, and decarbonization come together to improve power quality and availability while reducing the sector's environmental impact. What the three Ds don't convey, however, is the most important consideration in developing a global energy system: the human side, those who depend on reliable, affordable electricity to sustain and improve their quality of life. To shape a better path forward, we must rethink the three Ds and bring focus to the human elements of energy system transformation, or as I like to call them, the two Is, innovation and interconnectedness. EPRI's approach to energy, let me see, I think, yeah, let's go. Just trying to catch up with the slides. Okay. So EPRI's approach to energy innovation, with a commitment to a clean energy future and the best interests of human society. How can human-focused innovation drive cleaner, more resilient, and more accessible energy? Innovation rooted within organizational culture will drive optimization of new designs, new technologies, new materials, and new techniques. The energy sector, from its leaders to its early career up and rising stars, can and should learn from other sectors and incorporate new manufacturing and digital systems and more proven AI techniques to enable that clean, resilient, and more accessible decarbonized portfolio of the future. Clean energy innovation can create a healthier future for all. We're taking steps to realize this vision through the Low Carbon Resources Initiative, a global effort jointly led by EPRI and the Gas Technology Institute to accelerate decarbonization across the economy. By developing and deploying low carbon resources, from advanced nuclear renewables to hydrogen and carbon capture and sequestration, we can reduce U.S. energy-related CO2 emissions to more than 80% below 2005 levels by 2050. Realizing this clean energy vision requires a multi-pronged approach to nuclear innovation to maintain the existing fleet and usher in the next era of nuclear generation. First and foremost, enhance and modernize the current fleet to extend plant life. EPRI is leading innovation on several fronts. Machine learning to automate and enhance time-consuming manual tasks, such as routine fuel assembly manual inspections, increasing accuracy, mitigating risk, and reducing costs. LiDAR technology, used for deep sea inspections in the oil and gas industry, can quickly and precisely analyze solid objectives and surfaces with a reactor vessel during an outage, decreasing critical path time. And digital twins, creating computer-based replicas to help inform operations using data analytics and artificial intelligence. Beyond the existing fleet, nuclear innovation must offer new options. Advanced technologies such as small modular reactors. SMRs could help overcome the long lead times and other production challenges associated with nuclear construction. To help address this challenge, EPRI is exploring advanced manufacturing techniques, fabricating major SMR components using powder metallurgy, hot isostatic pressing, and electron beam welding to improve construction and delivery. In some cases, some of these new fabrication processes and manufacturing techniques that once took weeks can now be completed in minutes. Imagine that. I mentioned innovation for cleaner energy. Now let's turn to making energy more accessible. For developed regions, this means increasing access to cleaner, more resilient energy without compromising affordability. It also extends to building energy infrastructure to make the cleanest, lowest cost resources available for customers. For developing nations and some parts of the US, this means something very different. Improving quality of life by making electricity accessible to the 1 billion people around the world who live without it today. We all know the value electricity delivers, enabling commerce, education, healthcare, and so many other essential elements of our own lives. Bringing light to every household around the world should be a societal imperative, and nuclear energy can help get us there. We've covered the first I, innovation. The next, interconnectedness, reflects the continued evolution of our energy system. For more than a century, the electric grid has connected centralized generation with customers. Today's energy system is exponentially more interconnected than the electric grid of the past. Making efficient use of nuclear requires transitioning from baseload to flexible operation that grid support integration with renewables and electric vehicle infrastructure. EPRI's work in addressing this important need has helped consider reactors designed to be sited almost anywhere in an urban city or remote countryside. Regardless of how we label the energy system evolution, whether we're talking Ds or Is, technology or human factors, one fact is abundantly clear. The technologies driving change across the world's energy networks present opportunities to deliver cleaner energy more reliably. Doing so securely and affordably will require systems engineering, continued diligence, and a substantial commitment to R&D. Through global collaboration, we can turn the tide on greenhouse gas emissions without compromising reliability. We can build a flexible energy system that draws on all resources effectively. And we can make clean, affordable energy more accessible to more customers around the world. We invite you to join us on this journey. Emma Wong and the other EPRI experts involved in today's call can help address any questions about these projects. Together, we can create a more promising future for all. Thank you for listening. Emma, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Katie. All right. Our next speaker is Jennifer Ewell, and we have we have a quick fact in there from our EPRI Low Carbon Resource Initiative, if you want more information on that. And then soon we'll pop up another quick fact about NEI. So Jennifer, Dr. Jennifer Ewell is currently the NEI's Vice President for the Generation and Suppliers. She previously came from Jetson Hughes, but where I first met her was at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where she worked there for over 23 years. So she's got a lot of experience in this industry, and I'm really excited to hear what she has to tell us. So Jennifer, I turn it to you.
Well, thank you very much, Emma, and please call me Jennifer. And yeah, it makes me old. You were being very euphemistic in saying experience, but yes, officially I am much older than Emma and really appreciated working with Emma. And she was an up-and-coming star and decided to go to EPRI, where she's doing great things. So good, I would say, afternoon to everybody, and thank you to EPRI and to DC Win for putting this on. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the future of the U.S. industry and provide a few statistics that can help us better determine what that future is. So if we go to the next slide. So here's the decarbonization trajectory of the U.S. utilities. This is just a subset of the utilities. You'll not see every utility listed. We couldn't put that many on a slide. But there definitely is this growing consensus that we need to do deep decarbonization. And you can see here some commitments that are reflected, and we're seeing this in the integrated resource plans that the utilities have put together. So how are we going to get to this goal by 2050, but also how are we going to achieve the interim milestones along the way? So if we go to the next slide, this is a great statistic here. Wind, solar, nuclear already is providing 80% of America's carbon-free energy. And I put a statistic there about nuclear, and the previous speakers and Bob alluded to this. Nuclear is critical. It provides baseload power. It provides reliable baseload power. It operates 24/7, 365. And so at NEI, we see nuclear as being complementary with wind and solar and all of the other carbon-free options as a powerful combination that can help the utilities achieve their goals. And if we go to the next slide, here's another fact for you. Nuclear, looking in 2019, nuclear supplied more carbon-free electricity than any of the other types of generation. So that is about 55% of the carbon-free generation in 2019 was from nuclear. Okay, we do know that we are facing an economic issue with the competitiveness of nuclear. We do know that TMI and Pilgrim, for example, closed, and that resulted in a 12 million megawatt hours of annual carbon-free generation that's been lost. We do know, of course, about Indian Point that will be closing. So how are we going to prevent these great sources of safe, reliable, carbon-free energy from coming off the grid? We go to the next slide. Here's just a projection of what we're talking about in terms of decisions that are being made on plants. This is a slide that was developed a few years ago. So at this point, we do know that there are more plants that are projected to close. And the decisions are being made now. You can see the solid line projection. That is the announcement of closures. And that is done years before the actual closure takes place. And so we have to act now. We really need to change the cost effectiveness of the operating plants. We need to make the new designs more cost effective because nuclear has to play a role in carbon reduction. This has been proved by many independent studies that have been done, and we've got to stop this trend. So if we go to the next slide. Where are we at this point? Well, delivering the nuclear promise was put in place in the 2011 timeframe, and it was really thought to be a stretch goal to help the operating plants reduce their total generating costs. And at the time, it was thought, okay, let's try to reduce it by 30%. And a lot of people thought, no, that's really not possible. Well, actually, in 2019, that goal was achieved and it was exceeded because we reduced the generation cost down by 32%. And so what is great also on this slide to note is that these efficiencies were gained while safety and reliability improved. That is to say that running a safe and reliable plant is possible while reducing the total generation costs. So really, efficiency in terms of cost effectiveness measures and reliability measures, they're hand in hand with running a safe power plant. So if we go to the next slide. So just to bolster that argument, last year in 2019, the utilities had the best, most reliable operating history ever. It was 93.4% capacity factor. Truly, that is astonishing. So 93.4% of the time, nuclear was online, producing its total available power generation. And actually, because of this great capacity factor, even though plants have been shutting down, nuclear generated the highest amount of megawatt hours ever. So this is just a fantastic statement here about how we can improve efficiency, cost effectiveness, ensure safety, and ensure reliability all at the same time. Next slide, please. And how are we doing this? Innovation is a real key element to achieving these goals. And when we look at the operating plants, what does that mean? Well, that means digital technologies, that means artificial intelligence, that means additive manufacturing, so parts can be replaced. It also means automation in ways that haven't been used before. And it's a focus on efficiency, but through the use of technology. We also have to look at what this means for the future generation of plants, the new generation, advanced reactors. Well, innovation can play a key role in cost of licensing and cost of construction. It also can play a key role in cost of manufacturing. And of course, as we put our mind to ensuring that these plants are safe, we can do it in a way that uses the technologies of today and even the technologies of the future to make these plants even more cost effective, while of course being safer. Now, NRC plays a role here, of course, because the cost of licensing has to come down. The agility of the NRC needs to improve, and coming from the NRC, we've known that for a while, and there's been a lot of effort to try to incorporate agility and flexibility and efficiencies. So I have 100% confidence that as a nuclear industry as a whole, as a regulator, as the vendors, as the new advanced reactor designers, and as the utilities together with the research organizations like EPRI, we can get to the point where nuclear really is delivering the nuclear promise. So if we go to the next slide with taking a look at the policy level, what is our strategy for accelerating new nuclear? Well, I've talked about the product. It's got to be cost competitive. It's got to be timely. It's got to be credible. The utilities need to step up to the plate, and they have in putting in their integrated resource plans, the nuclear as a generation source. The policies have to be improved. The states, unfortunately, there is no carbon tax. I'm not suggesting that at a federal level, but there needs to be a recognition of all the attributes that nuclear offers. And that is, of course, the reliability, the resiliency. Nuclear operates through hurricanes and does it safely. Nuclear operates through extreme weather changes. The cold snaps, for example, prevent some generation sources from operating. For example, we need that to be credited in how nuclear is reimbursed for its services. And hopefully this can be done on a federal level, but at this point in time, with the deregulation of a number of states, this is being done on a state-by-state level. At NEI, we're working very hard to try to get these policies implemented. And then, of course, we need the financial backing. And I've recently attended a seminar at NEI with a number of financial organizations, and they are bullish on nuclear. And so the money is out there. We need to develop a cost-competitive and credible product in a timely manner. So if we go to the next slide. So where are we right now? Well, we're making a lot of progress. NuScale and Oklo have their reviews underway at the NRC. We have a growing number of NEI member companies showing interest in new nuclear, and we have the financial input and the policy interest through the federal government with DOE's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project, where 2 demonstration programs were recently announced. And these plants will be online, advanced reactors, non-LWR reactors, in 5 to 7 years. We have further financial support from DOE coming down the pike. So I just want to end with, we're all in this together. This is carbon reduction and climate change is an existential threat to society. Nuclear needs to play a key role, and collectively, including the NRC, I have no doubt that we will be successful. So thanks very much. We can go to the last slide and just end with NEI's vision, and that is a world powered by clean and reliable energy. We're not saying it's just nuclear, because we want an all of the above strategy to have energy diversity powering the grid. But nuclear is going to play a key role. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so for our third panelist, and not least important, maybe most important, is to hear from the utilities themselves. So I would like to introduce Runette, who is the Director of License Renewal and Decommissioning Planning at Duke Energy. She also has positions at Oconee in a variety of different areas and has been at Duke since 1992. So she has a lot of different experience and to share with us. Also, we have a fun fact about Duke Energy and the company's commitments to reducing carbon dioxide emissions. So, Runette, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Emma. You can go to my first slide. So thanks to Katie and Jennifer, they gave a really good perspective of the nuclear industry and the country as a whole, and what the factors are in considering carbon reduction and the climate change that we face. I want to give a perspective just from a single utility and give you an idea of what that means just from the utility's perspective. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Duke, just some background if you're not familiar. Duke's nuclear fleet consists of 11 units operating on 6 nuclear sites in North Carolina and South Carolina. The fleet's just under 11,000 megawatts. The plants have been providing half of the electricity to Carolina's customers for decades, since Robinson came online in 1970. So not only do they provide the electricity we rely on, they also remain economic drivers for the communities. We provide thousands of well-paying jobs. More than 5,000 folks work at the nuclear sites in the Carolinas. with additional contract workers and supporting refueling outages and major project work. We provide significant tax revenues in the communities that we serve, paying more than $300 million in property and payroll taxes each year associated with the nuclear plants and their operation. And then not to mention just community partnerships, community service, volunteer efforts. Our employees and their families are very active in the communities that we serve, and that brings a lot of livelihood to those communities, which are oftentimes rural communities. But as you can see from the chart, if you can see that chart, it's got the megawatt output and the license expiration dates. And so the current licenses of the fleet begins to expire in as early as 2030 and continues through the mid-2040s. And I'll talk more about that later. Next slide, please. So carbon reduction. Duke Energy is committed to leading the way on a solution to climate change that poses such a challenge for our nation. So we've set aggressive goals to ensure that we're tackling this climate change from all angles. About a year ago, in September of 2019, Duke announced carbon reduction goals of at least 50% by 2030 and a goal of net zero by 2050. And so you're probably wondering, well, how much does that really help? If you think back to Jennifer's decarbonization trajectory slide, Duke Energy was one of the slices in that curve, and it was a fairly significant slice as compared to other utilities, but it wasn't necessarily significant in the overall area under the curve. So, if Duke Energy were to do this, how much change would it really make? So I like this graphic because it puts it into some perspective that I think everybody can relate to. And that is, in 2018, we had already reduced carbon emissions from the 2005 levels by 31%. And so that's the equivalent of keeping more than 9 million passenger vehicles off the road. That's all the cars in Florida and Connecticut. That's the states, the little state icons there at the bottom, if you can't tell what those are. So our 50% reduction goal by 2030 is the equivalent of 14 million passenger vehicles off the road. And that's the equivalent of all the cars in Florida, Ohio, and Tennessee. And then if we get to net zero by 2050, which is the goal, that's the equivalent of 29 million passenger vehicles off the road. And that's equivalent of all the cars in California, North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia. And so everybody probably remembers seeing the impact of the stay-at-home orders back in the spring. I know there were a lot of pictures and satellite pictures and graphs of the impact to the environment based on those stay-at-home orders. And so just imagine if those impacts were permanent. And that's the opportunity we have here, is to make that happen with our strategies. Next slide. So nuclear fleet operation, what is its contribution to this carbon reduction strategy? Nuclear very much underpins the generation for Duke Energy. Jennifer mentioned that nuclear provides just over 50% of the country's carbon-free electricity. Well, nuclear provides 86% of Duke Energy's carbon-free electricity, 86%. So, and that's not just in the Carolinas, that's the entire service territory, which includes parts of Florida and the Midwest. And so imagine, putting together a strategy that would have to replace 86% of your carbon-free generation. So because of that significance, we really are relying on our existing nuclear fleet to continue to operate. Jennifer also mentioned the capacity factor. Duke has enjoyed greater than 90% capacity factor for 21 consecutive years. And so definitely reliable and relied upon for that 24/7, 365 generation. And the fleet avoids about 52 million tons of CO2 each year. So that's pretty significant as well. But then recall from my earlier slide, the licenses do begin to expire in just 10 years from now. And so the only path to the carbon goals that we've set is to renew the licenses of that fleet and to keep that 86% of our carbon-free generation operating beyond 2030 until new technologies can replace them. Next slide. So what does the path look like? So far, the majority of our carbon reduction has really been driven by the retirement of coal and replacement of that generation with lower carbon and cost-effective natural gas. But to get to that net zero goal of 2050, we're going to have to move away from the natural gas, and that's a little tougher problem to solve. So nuclear gives us really the foundation for the carbon-free electricity that can be supplemented with other fuel types. So as I mentioned, the initial focus is on subsequent license renewal. So in the early 2020s decade, that's what we'll be focusing on. And Jennifer also mentioned integrated resource plans. Duke Energy submitted IRPs in North Carolina and South Carolina in September. And so those are pretty fresh, freshly evaluated. And so that integrated resource plan evaluated 6 scenarios of generation portfolio planning, different mixes of different types of generation that are to get to the most cost effective and the low carbon alternative. So while we had 6 different scenarios, every one of those scenarios included the nuclear plants operating with subsequent license renewal. So definitely underpins the strategy going forward. But as we look ahead in that resource planning into the late 2020s and 2030s, we do see in our modeling suggests that we will need new carbon-free generation that can be dispatched on demand and reliable during weather events. And so we see nuclear as an opportunity for that new generation as well. And so first, the SMRs that we've discussed here today is probably the most furthest along in development. And so hopefully they'll be ready to deploy in the late 2020s. And then further into the future, we're excited about the prospect of advanced non-light water reactor designs, which use high temperature gas or liquid metal or molten salt as a coolant instead of regular water. And actually, Duke Energy just joined an advisory group for TerraPower and GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy's Natrium reactor, which is a 345 megawatt advanced liquid sodium fast reactor with a molten salt energy storage system. And so actually just last week, the Department of Energy awarded TerraPower $80 million to build and demonstrate that Natrium sodium cooled reactor. And so DOE expects to invest $3.2 billion over the next 7 years to develop and deliver safe licensed advanced reactors for commercial operation. And so Duke is very excited to be in a partnership with TerraPower and GE Hitachi on the Natrium reactor. And that ends my presentation on the utility perspective and low carbon conversation. I'll turn it back over to Emma for the rest of the discussion.
All right, thanks, Renette. That was really insightful. I didn't actually know that you all joined up on the Natrium reactor, so that's news to me. So that's great. So if Hannah, you would put up the next poll. So now we'll poll the audience to kind of see where you would like to see this discussion begin. The first option is we can start talking about, what is the most important driver to a low carbon future, or what is the biggest barrier that would be hardest to overcome on this. So I think we wanted to try to keep this at a minute, try to keep this quick. It does say 5 minutes on there, but Hannah, please cut it off at about a minute. At the last poll, we did, try to figure out, what is everyone's favorite season. It was the fall. I don't know if our panelists have the same, insight on that, but I guess we're in the audience's favorite season right now. So that's really nice. Actually, I did not vote for the fall. I voted for the spring because it's kind of like a renewal and looking forward into the year. So that's kind of, that's my thoughts on the season. So, all right. So I think we're almost to the end there. And so oh, okay. So it was overwhelming. And this is kind of the question that I wanted to ask and have the discussion start off with as well is, what is the barrier that will be hardest to overcome as we move forward into the future? So we'll start with Katie.
Move them, go through them, or something like that. And it's really going to be all of the above. I think the greatest barrier is not in the technology space, but it's really in the public acceptance, getting regulators on board, getting people to be more comfortable with nuclear and all of its amazing benefits that it has to offer. And so I think if we can get the word out to more and more people, get them to be more comfortable, then I think we could break through that barrier. But that's the biggest one that I see. Thanks.
I think, Jennifer, I think you have something to add.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I would agree with Katie. Social license is critical. And we have a lot of work to do. We do know that a lot of people don't even know that nuclear provides 20% of the power, and certainly don't know that nuclear energy is carbon free. At NEI, we've started to think of calling nuclear energy nuclear carbon-free energy so that people better understand that. So I would add to Katie's response and add the education element to that, because we need to ensure that from starting at the grade schools all the way up through universities, that people have an introduction to nuclear and understand the benefits. Because as we all know, I think most people think of nuclear and they have a reaction to it that is not necessarily a positive one. However, we are seeing that as we talk about nuclear carbon-free energy, there's an overwhelming response that nuclear becomes a lot more supported by the public. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Runette, do you have anything to add?
I do. So from the utility perspective, it's interesting because I was going to say maybe not the biggest barrier, but a large barrier would be the technology gap. But Katie initially, being from the research area, said she didn't think technology was the issue, which is a great thing to hear. So it's interesting that we would have different perspectives, but I don't know that it's so much the technology. It's just the fact from the utility perspective, we really need, some diversity in that technology. It can't just be one technology. One of the things that, from doing our integrated resource plans is the more megawatts you add of one particular type of generation, kind of the less useful it becomes. And so you can't kind of go all wind or all solar or all storage. You really have to have a good mixture of that to get to these carbon-free goals. And so I think that'll be the big challenge from the utility perspective, is being sure that we invest correctly in all of the new technologies that are going to become available.
Yes, and I'm seeing some information in the chats and in some of the questions here, building upon this, that some of it may be public relations issues may be a big barrier. There's a nuclear prejudice. So, do you have any comments on that?
Are you directing to me? Well, we talked. Yeah, Jennifer just talked about PR issues, and I think we have to have good, advocacy in place, and I think nuclear is getting better at that, because we maybe certainly solar and other, the new bells and whistles type of generation has been really good at advocacy, and so I think it's just a matter of nuclear getting out in front, and I think we're doing a much better job at that now than we did just a few years ago.
And if I can add, I would say my point about education perhaps wasn't appropriately worded, because understanding the benefits of nuclear and then turning that into public policy, so that people do understand the role that the critical role that nuclear plays in a reliable, carbon-free energy portfolio. And nuclear is credited for that in terms of cost, I think is also key, because only a portion of the fleet is in regulated states. We also have the merchant fleet, and then they are, of course, competing with very low natural gas costs, and don't get the benefit of all of the attributes that nuclear provides.
So I'll just add a little bit, Emma, and I'll just regale a quick tale that I heard this morning about the role of public affairs. And it gets back to way back when bridges were made of wood, and Carnegie came up with the steel bridge, and people were deathly afraid of it collapsing. And we talk about the elephant in the room. Well, he was ingenious, and he had a big carnival, and then said elephants would never step on something unsafe. And he had the elephant walk across, and all of a sudden, you know where we are now, right? We've got steel bridges everywhere. So what I'm thinking is, what's our elephant? What's our elephant in the room that can help us, just connect with the public and go, this is cool. Nuclear is awesome. It's the way to go, as one of many great pathways to decarbonization.
That's a great segue, Katie. I love that analogy. What is our elephant? And I have a comment here. Do we think waste disposal might be our biggest elephant in the room? Katie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's been, so having some time at the Department of Energy, I remember the secretary said we were going to decide on Yucca either way. I mean, it's definitely a great barrier, but the fact that the industry has such an amazing, impeccable record of safety with waste disposal. Again, I think it may be getting the word out and understanding that it's safe, and that, I love the football field analogy of where it's not, the waste is just, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, like 7 feet or something for the US and 70 feet for the whole world. I mean, it's not a lot, but folks are really afraid of it and wondering what we can do with that. And I think that it's an education and I believe through innovation too. We're working on lots of ways to work on that waste and tapping into it. And so I'd say we'll continue to explore that. Thanks.
Jennifer, what is NEI trying to do on the PR about waste disposal?
So we have a policy process that involves all of our advisory committees. So that's the CNO, Chief Nuclear Officers, under the Nuclear Strategic Issue Advisory Committee. We have CEOs that are part of our board, and then our executive committee. And we've got a number of different perspectives from the suppliers that are so critical to the success of nuclear under the Supplier Advisory Committee. So we have all these different factors or viewpoints, I should say, that are feeding into a policy. At this point in time, we are, of course, following the consolidated interim storage and hoping and working with the applicants to see that be successful. And so our efforts have been focused on that primarily, because at the same time, going back and discussing Yucca Mountain, it just didn't seem feasible right now based on the politics. So that had been our decision. And at this stage, it's consolidated interim storage all the way.
All right, great. So kind of going back to decarbonization, we do have a question here about, the role that nuclear can play, going beyond electricity, right? There are kilowatts, gigawatts of electricity being produced, but could it also produce hydrogen to replace the carbon fuels in the industry? Sorry about the little pop-up window there. Thank you. And so either Jennifer or Katie, do you want to start off with hydrogen production?
Sure, I can start. So the DOE, under the Light Water Reactor Sustainability Program, has been involved in promoting the, I would say, the hydrogen production as a means of addressing these very low electricity prices. In other words, we've got these plants that are competing in the merchant market, and as the wind and solar is produced and coming into the grid, the price drops significantly. And so during those time periods, why not produce something else of benefit to society? And that is hydrogen. It also can be desalination for water. It can be pretty much other process heat applications that are used by or would be used by some chemical companies. So at this stage, there's been a number of plants, there are a number of utilities that are working with DOE under the LWR sustainability to do pilot programs for the hydrogen production. And so I think it's about 3 plants that have programs underway. And I think that's a really great start to develop a process, iron out the kinks, really understand the economics, and then be able to deploy that. And then, as I said, I think we can then also start using the process heat in a different way as well. But it's great that DOE, along with the industry, is taking this first step when it comes to hydrogen production. And that is, at this stage, just using the electricity versus process heat would be not producing electricity, but taking off the heat. So good things to come.
That sounds very, very exciting. And based on that, since you mentioned, there is a lot of work going on in this area about hydrogen production, looking at a lot of different research. I know EPRI has some research going on in many different areas about hydrogen, not just nuclear producing hydrogen, but, other, power generation sources able to use hydrogen as well. And Katie, I would like you to kind of address that, and also, how do we make sure that we're not, as EPRI, we're doing a lot of research. How do we make sure that there's a lot of different organizations out there? How do we make sure we're not working on the same thing and doing double work? How do we make sure we're collaborating and coordinating appropriately?
Thanks, Emma. That's a great question, because a problem this big means and with all the enthusiasm around it, there's a lot of groups all around the world that are working to address decarbonization, and hydrogen has become one of the most promising energy carriers to help us achieve the net zero. And so part of the Low Carbon Resources Initiative is having a very, very measured and deliberative stakeholder engagement process. So what can we do to identify it's twofold. It's technology and stakeholder. So if we're looking at the technologies, let's do a state-of-the-art analysis, identify the gaps and the barriers. We know the goal. How are we going to get there? What are the different pathways? And so it takes a little while to do that study. So in the first quarter of 21, we plan to have a roadmap that will look at those and chart the course for the technology pathways there. And by doing that, having a common vision and a common pathway for folks to point to, that allows the many stakeholders to apply their resources and their greatest strengths to what is best suited for them. And then we can get together and accelerate progress to that future. And so part of that is also the people side, where we can make sure that we have broad information sharing, that we keep people abreast of what's happening, and we reach out to those stakeholders and make sure that we're all aware of what the others are doing, but also help to encourage and foster investment in each type of technology, so that one, we can get them off the ground, two, we can deploy them, and then three, make sure the regulators can see the benefits of what's happening so that it can be successfully adopted and deployed.
Great, thanks, Katie. And I just noticed that we have already run out of time because I was so engrossed in asking all of these questions that keep popping up in the chat. And we have had great audience participation in this, and I wish we could keep going, but unfortunately we have run out of time. So I want to pass it off to my co-host, Ashley, to give some closing remarks.
All right, thanks so much, Emma. I believe that there's going to be a poll popping up shortly, so you all can participate in that as it shows up. I just wanted to echo Bob Coward's thoughts from earlier today and thank everyone for participating. The speakers and organizers of this event, have worked hard to put this together, and it's been such a comprehensive and insightful program in perfect timing for Nuclear Science Week. So DC Wind was really excited to put this together for everyone with EPRI. And as you work to answer your poll, I would just like to note that all of these statements, they're very impactful. There's some great key takeaways from today's program, and you can use these moving forward to maybe start some conversations with your friends and family about what you've learned today, using maybe some of the information we've provided in the chat. If you really enjoyed today's webinar, EPRI and US Wind work to put on events like this pretty frequently, so you can check us out on social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. You should be able to find EPRI, US Wind, NEI, and also Duke. So I hope you all enjoyed this program today. Enjoy the rest of the week, and this will conclude today's program. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Thank you, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it. And with that, I think that will be the end of our session. Thank you to all of the panelists, really. This was great. I loved it.